I was looking after my Aunt Carol's place one Saturday when she took off for California with some of her book club companions. I was staying in the spare room situated across the hall from hers. That spare room always featured twin beds which my brother and I would use during sleepovers at her house. I opted for the bed positioned by the far wall, but before settling in, I double-checked all the entry points, ensuring they were firmly secured. When I did finally get into bed, it was still quite early, and I didn't drift off to sleep for quite some time. There wasn't a great deal happening at my aunt's place. I spent maybe an hour or two just scrolling through my phone, watching short clips, messaging friends, whatever. That's when I began to perceive someone's voice coming from outside. It sounded distinctly like a female repeating the word, "Hey." I quietly exited the bedroom and cautiously moved closer to the front door, taking my time as I attempted to listen more clearly. It was definitely a woman's voice, just calling out "hey" every, say, 5 to 15 seconds. As I drew nearer to the front door, I realized that appeared to be the source. My aunt's main door doesn't have a peephole, but the windows in her study offered a clear view of the front porch. So I headed over to that window to try and glimpse who was out there. I tried to subtly peer through the gaps in the fabric curtains without drawing attention. But I must not have been very successful, because when I looked, I did see a woman standing on my aunt's steps, and she was staring directly at me as if she anticipated me looking through those drapes. Once more she said "hey" with a rather unsettling smile stretched across her face. This woman seemed elderly, but don't imagine her as some fragile, sweet old lady. She looked like she was perhaps in her late 60s or early 70s, and something about her eyes just gave me the creeps. I backed away from the window and considered it might be one of my aunt's acquaintances. But it was after midnight. Why would anyone visit at such an hour? Why wasn't she knocking or ringing the doorbell? Why was she merely standing outside saying "hey" repeatedly? I was genuinely disturbed. I simply retreated to the spare bedroom and closed the door. Now, with the door shut, unlike before, I couldn't hear that woman any longer. Perhaps whoever it was had simply decided to depart. I started messaging everyone about it, my sisters, my friends, explaining how strange it was. But a decent period of quiet passed, and I started to feel a bit calmer. My sister suggested I contact my aunt, but there was zero chance she'd be awake, and she rarely even checked her cell phone anyway. Just like that, something shattered the silence, a loud thudding sound coming from the side door. It wasn't a tap or a gentle knock, but a forceful thump. I felt that sharp pang in my chest as my body switched into fight or flight mode. Moments after the thudding ceased, I heard that recognizable voice utter "hey" again. With that surge of adrenaline, I suppose I felt a burst of courage. I grabbed the curtains and pulled them open. There I was, face to face with this frightening older woman with only a thin layer of glass separating us. I yelled at her unsettling, grinning face, "I'm contacting the authorities." I let the curtains fall back into place and sprinted back out to the living area. I glanced around the house, then dashed upstairs to barricade myself in the upstairs spare room. I didn't actually intend to call the police. I don't know why, I just wanted to wait it out. I climbed into the bed in the upstairs spare bedroom and pulled the covers up tightly. A few hours went by and I was still awake. Only then did I finally venture back downstairs to peek outside each window. That peculiar old woman seemed to have vanished. The following morning I called my aunt and recounted the events. She started shouting into the phone, clearly panicking and agitated. She recounted how just days earlier she felt she was being slightly followed in the supermarket by some woman, perhaps slightly younger than her, who just kept staring at her for no discernible reason. I told her to relax. I wasn't entirely sure whether to connect the two incidents or not. But when we eventually finished our conversation, I did have to pause and reflect. My aunt is 80 years old and she's lost a bit of her sharpness, so I do have to take some of the things she says with a degree of skepticism. But the intensity in her voice when she spoke about the woman in the store really sent shivers down my spine. I still wonder if it could possibly have been the same individual. My name is Alex, currently a first-year student at Boston College, which isn't located in the most secure neighborhood. I had recently gone through a breakup with my first girlfriend, so I decided to re-enter the online dating scene. I was using Bumble when I came across a profile for a brunette named Emily with whom I really clicked. She also attended Boston College. We both enjoyed hiking, loved going to concerts, and even shared a similar sense of humor. I suggested we go on a music event date, and she enthusiastically agreed. She instructed me to meet her at a specific landmark near campus and she would come pick me up. So around 8 o'clock, I stood waiting on a corner of a quiet side street, anticipating Emily's arrival. She had asked me to share my live location with her, which I did. A few minutes later, I noticed a dark sedan turning down the street and heading towards me. It then stopped right in front of me and the driver lowered the window. It wasn't Emily, though, but some unfamiliar older gentleman. He asked what I was doing standing there by myself, which struck me as incredibly odd right away. I replied that I was waiting for someone. He then inquired if I was waiting for Emily, and I confirmed. "How did you know?" I asked. He stated he was Emily's uncle and told me to get in so he could give me a lift to where she was. I took a good look at him and honestly, he seemed a little old to be her uncle. I'm not naive when it comes to potentially unsafe situations, so I replied in a firm tone, "Why didn't you mention you'd be picking me up?" He claimed he wanted to ensure safety and maybe vet me before I met up with his niece. I took another careful look at the man and said nothing. I simply turned and began walking away in the opposite direction from which his car was facing. He started calling out, "Hey, hey!" sounding surprised that I was just walking off like that. But I've heard far too many accounts of disappearances to not recognize where this situation could potentially lead. I heard the guy's car start moving, and I glanced back to make sure he wasn't attempting a U-turn to follow me. I exhaled in relief when he drove straight ahead and made a left turn, disappearing from view. I continued walking down the block towards the college grounds. I reached the end of the block and was about to turn the corner when I noticed what I was fairly certain was the same car the man was driving, just parked on the side of the road with its lights off. I briefly tried to peer into the window as I walked past, but the glass was tinted. I tried not to appear suspicious and kept walking. I received a text message from the person posing as Emily saying, "What happened?" My uncle was waiting for you." I chose to ignore the message and continued walking. I kept checking over my shoulder to see if the car would move. When I got to a junction in the road, I turned right and then absolutely bolted in the direction of campus. Surprisingly, I wasn't pursued. I made it back to campus feeling breathless and started heading towards my residence hall. I felt like I could hear footsteps trailing behind me, though I initially thought I might be just feeling paranoid. When I heard a distinct cough from behind me, I knew for sure I was being tailed. I deliberately ducked down behind a large van and paused to give myself time to pinpoint where the footsteps were coming from. They were several cars away from me, and I suddenly remembered I had never stopped sharing my live location with Emily. Or rather, with that man. I saw him. It was that older man. He was approaching from between two parked cars across from where I was hidden. He yelled something that I couldn't fully make out, but it sounded like he said, "Wait up, we need to talk." He had to be in his late 60s or older. There was no way he would catch me if I sprinted. I easily lost him when I ran and reached the safety of my dorm room. My roommate wasn't there, so I had no one immediate to talk to about it. But when I lay down on my bed, I received another text message from that man, and it was absolutely chilling. It read, "You're a worthless piece of you're fortunate you got away. I would have crushed your disgusting face." I still have the screenshot of that message. I replied by saying, "Thanks for the threat, it's going straight to law enforcement," and then I blocked his number. I still have the entire conversation saved as evidence, and I intend to go to the police with it eventually. Hopefully they are able to take some action regarding it. When I was 17, I had a weekend job as a summer maintenance assistant at my old high school. I would work shifts that varied between daytime and nighttime, sometimes from 9 a.m. until midnight, depending on how much income I required. Often I would be tasked with securing the premises after the older maintenance staff had departed. This was back before the high school had security cameras installed in every single corridor. So one particular evening, one of my supervisors, Mr. Davis, had to leave ahead of schedule, meaning I would be finishing the remainder of my shift alone and would be responsible for locking up for the night. He told me to text him if I needed anything, as he always did, and then he left. I quite liked it when I was left on my own, because typically I would just perform maybe half an hour of tasks and then just hang around on my phone or even leave early and still receive payment for the entire shift. I definitely pushed the boundaries with what I could get away with at that place. One of the things Mr. Davis requested I do before leaving was move all the extra stage props from the auditorium down to the basement storage area. So I figured I'd do that and then simply head home. I grabbed a stack of 6 chairs and started carrying them down to the basement. The lighting in the storage room was extremely poor. It was quite unpleasant. The entire basement of that school wasn't exactly inviting. It felt more akin to the basement of a commercial warehouse. Anyway, there were what appeared to be a collection of old stage costumes and some dusty furniture covered by large canvas tarps. You know, those big sheets that look like blankets. It seemed much of the school's old theater equipment was stored down here. I dropped the stack of chairs where the rest of the chairs were kept and went back upstairs to the auditorium to retrieve more. When I returned downstairs with another load of chairs, I noticed one of the large trunks that had been covered by a tarp was now exposed. The covering sheet had been removed from on top of it. I know with certainty it was covered just minutes earlier because it was one of the items right at the front. I texted Mr. Davis saying, "I think someone might be down in the basement." He replied, "What do you mean?" And I said one of the coverings on the trunk was moved. He took a moment to respond, stating, "No one else should be down there." And then I observed something. The large tarp tucked away in the corner of the storage room, positioned outside the limited illumination produced at the center of the space. It was clearly concealing something. I cautiously started to tiptoe towards it. When I was just a few feet away from it, I realized that whatever was under that tarp, it was shifting just ever so slightly. There was undeniably someone concealed underneath. I panicked and sprinted back upstairs and locked the basement door firmly. I texted Mr. Davis again saying, "Someone is hiding under a cover in the basement." He replied, "Contact the authorities." But I insisted he just return since he had only departed about 10 minutes ago. He was unwilling to come back, though. He told me to go check it out, and that it was probably nothing, essentially telling me to confront whoever was down there myself. So I descended into the basement again. However, the tarp was now spread out flat on the floor, and whoever had been hiding under it was gone. But potentially the most terrifying part was yet to occur. As I stood there in the storage room, there were loud, resonant, metallic thumps coming from directly above my head. I looked up and saw slight indentations slowly forming in the large metal pipes running along the ceiling above me. Someone was moving through the pipes. They paused literally above me. And then those bangs came again, as if whoever was in there was trying to force their way through the pipe structure. I didn't know what was unfolding, but I was officially finished with this situation. I raced up the stairs, secured the school building, and went straight home. I recounted a partial truth to Mr. Davis the following day, telling him I thought I saw someone in the corner, but they were gone when I went back to check. I claimed there was nothing else to report. Given it was my final week working there, it didn't remain my concern for long.